Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Fantastic Four: First Steps not really meet the projections that had been anticipated for the film, with the movie dropping off quite a bit on its first Saturday, and then subsequently also on its first Sunday as well, coming in at around $118 million domestically, which is still about $7 million behind the opening of where James Gunn's Superman film opened. And what's even worse is that the film also only opened with an extra $5 million internationally than that of Superman. And so whereas we have a pretty close call as far as the total box office, right, $218 million total opening for Fantastic Four versus Superman's $220 million total opening for its opening weekend, and the actuals for the film have yet to come in. This is definitely not where I think Marvel wants this movie to be, and anyone who wants this movie to do better than Superman is, I think, going to walk away from this weekend disappointed, because this film is actually struggling and suffering from the same issue that James Gunn's Superman has, which is that it is coming in way too strong domestically versus its international total. And though that might be something that the studio likes because, hey, you get a lot more money back from the domestic market than you do the internationals, when it comes to your global box office, if you are wanting your movie to be a massive global box office hit, and you want to be able to run with certain numbers and run with certain figures and even have those figures to sell to your investors, yeah, having this kind of a split is the backwards way that typical Hollywood films, especially MCU movies, have been able to do this stuff in the past. The other thing, too, that the Fantastic Four film has a lot to worry about is the fact that whereas Superman had a very strong week 1 to week 2 hold, MCU movies are notorious for having some of the biggest drop-offs from their week 1 to week 2 totals domestically, usually dropping around 60% or higher in almost every single case. Whether the film is well liked, whether the film is heavily criticized, this film is definitely more so on the being liked territory. On critic list, it still has a rad score over there, whereas James Gunn Superman still has a decent score, right, in the comparison between those two movies. But even with that being the case, right, even with this film having some positive praise, it is still also filled with a bit of criticism, and it is still coming from a company that overall has lost quite a bit of its box office prowess. And even though they're going to try to run with these numbers and say, man, oh man, look at how great this movie is doing, I know that they probably wanted to walk away with a win up against Superman, and since they're not likely to get that same kind of hold that Superman did, again, we'll find out very quickly. We'll see what the Sunday to Monday drop-off is like. We'll get the actuals from the weekend too to get us a better idea and a better story. But this is definitely not the position that Fantastic Four wants to be in because of the historical consistency that MCU films have had in those week 2 drop-offs. They would want to have started off a little bit higher than Superman if they wanted to go toe-to-toe. If the numbers indeed actually hold to this level, if we come across and come away from this weekend with the films having almost the exact same type of opening weekend, with only a couple of million or less separating the two. Again, that number could get higher or lower depending on what the actuals say when those get reported sometime tomorrow, domestically at least. It's going to tell us quite a bit as far as where they're starting off with. And again, with those week 2 drop-offs likely to be a lot higher for Fantastic Four, oh boy, could it be a very bad sign for them going forward. Again, still too early to tell at this point in time, but it is definitely not as great as some people like Tony over at Deadline, for instance, would want to make you believe. And it's also quite funny because I have his article up here for a second, as he seems to have a bit of a jab, and I don't know necessarily if it's directed at me. As you all know, I do call myself the critic who is a cynic, and I saw this line in here and thought, whoa, maybe it's saying something. I honestly don't know. As it says here, as we said yesterday, cynics go pound sand. I don't know. What say you? Do you think he's talking to me, or do you think that he's just talking to everyone else that criticizes him and the likes of him that just, again, run with a lot of headlines that oftentimes say information that is either not correct or definitely lead people astray quite a bit? Let's go ahead, though, and dive into it. Going over to the global box office, good old Nance, of course, who initially in her article had this going, oh yeah, this film's going to make 220 to 230 million. Oh, wait, it's actually 218. This, again, just as a reminder that the traditional box office media coverage and how they're covering these things, their metrics are not nearly as in line as they used to be. and they've clearly lost a bit of a step. Now, whereas these numbers are still not quite at the heights of what was being projected by some of the other sites out there, obviously look at Box Office Theory, Box Office Pro, etc., it is definitely within the range of, I think, all of those sites. These are films that are, again, even despite having very big opening, having very big pre-sales. In the case of Fantastic Four, it had a pretty decent opening, it had about a $2 million advantage. against James Gunn's Superman, and that was a $2 million advantage up against it without having that extra Prime Day, debut and Prime Day premiere that Superman actually ended up having. To have it now swing the other way, where Fantastic Four now falls beneath because of the Saturday and Sunday numbers, again, tells us a bit about how this film seems to be having a pretty consistent run for a MCU movie, where you have these precipitous drop-offs. And again, that Sunday to Monday drop-off is going to be, I think, that first sign. If it's on the higher side of things, if it's in that like 70-80% territory, okay, probably looking at having a pretty sizable drop off between those two. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into the full chart over on thenumbers.com. Starting off first with Fantastic Four, $118 million domestic. So again, definitely I think about what people were expecting for this movie. It falls within the average that a lot of sites were putting out there, but also did not reach the heights that many also thought the film had the potential of doing. I remember that at one point it seemed like, hey, having a 125 debut seems very likely. Even Deadline on Friday was running with that, saying, hey, it looks like this film is doing exactly what Superman did. The issue, of course, being it had a better start than Superman, but did not have as better holds on its first Saturday or Sunday numbers either. So right now, Fantastic Four, again, as far as its opening in the history of the MCU, this is not near the highest. This is definitely on the lower side of things. This is kind of the state of the MCU right now, where it's very much struggling to do much of anything, not just domestically, but also internationally, right? Superman had that same issue, right? Remember, the biggest movies of this year have all opened to over $300 million globally. This film, just like Superman, has opened to $200 million-ish globally. And so whereas we have, and that, obviously this means if it follows a traditional average box office run, $600 million is on the table, or more is on the table. In fact, if you have the kind of drop-offs that MCU films tend to have, and therefore not having your typical average box office run, then that would mean this movie getting to $500 million and maybe capping out at $600 million is kind of a hope at this point, right? Trying to do everything that they can to provide whatever hopium that they might actually need. As of right now, I don't really think there's a lot of it. Again, week 2 will tell us a lot more, but kind of like with Superman last weekend, I think that these numbers are definitely not as impressive as what some people might try to spin it as, right? Just like Superman's numbers were not that impressive, especially having that pretty bad international number. If Fantastic Four is not able to hold on domestically or internationally, and that's going to be the real test, right? We're going to see, obviously, that domestic hold, but if it can't do better than Superman did internationally in its second weekend, it's going to be a lot of trouble for Fantastic Four going forward. Speaking of Superman, it is also still holding pretty well at its third week of release. Again, typically movies like this you would expect to see, especially with its positive word of mouth, drops right now in the 40s, and you're just not seeing that. So whereas Superman had a very strong week 2 hold for the kind of movie that it is still not seeing the kinds of holds that a film like this would hope to see to get the kind of box office that some people may have been expecting for this movie. As far as its total domestic is concerned, it definitely is still possible for the movie to end its domestic run around $350 million, right? That's still something that is within reach, I would think, but it's definitely going to get a lot harder as these weeks go on. So because there's very little competition at the box office, there's not a whole lot of new releases going on, maybe it'll be able to get some of those premium format screens back in the next couple of weeks, right? Obviously, Disney's going to have kind of a vice grip on those going forward, at least for the next couple of weeks. But if Superman is able to do that, it might be able to have much better holds down the line and might be able to, again, get those drops in the 40s and 30s that you would typically need to see and like to see for a movie like it. The best example I can really give you is Jurassic World Rebirth of all movies, right? When it comes to this movie, this film has a weak advantage, or rather a weak disadvantage, you could say, between it and Superman, right? It came out a week earlier than Superman did, and as you can see, Jurassic World Rebirth is dropping in the 40s. I remember last week, it dropped in the 40s in its third week of release. So just based on that comparison alone, Rebirth is actually holding a lot better percentage-wise than against Superman. So even though Superman has gotten very positive word of mouth and had a very strong hold last weekend, Rebirth actually holding a lot better down the stretch than Superman is. Now, it's still obviously making $13 million here. It's at $301 million. That's why, even though this movie internationally is the much bigger story, the other thing, too, that's really big about this Jurassic World Rebirth movie is that it's doing much better domestically than anyone could have anticipated, right? This is the kind of movie, based off of its reception, that should not have reached $300 million at the domestic box office, and yet it has done that. And the fact that it's holding as well as it is means that, just like for Superman, $350 million is also on the table for this movie too. It'll be very interesting to see where these two films end by the end of their respective runs. Rebirth actually has the potential at this point to be able to actually do better than Superman because of its holds. Now, again, there might be that disadvantage between it and Superman's opening weekends and everything like that. And obviously, the global total is not even close to a comparison. Right now, Jurassic World is just running away with those international numbers, and Superman has no hope of actually doing that. So Jurassic World Rebirth is going to be the winner of the summer battle between these three movies, Superman, Fantastic Four, and Rebirth. But Superman, again, domestically at the very least, will definitely be a bit more competitive there too. But Rebirth, I think, is the surprise. No one, I think, thought this film would be doing as well as it is domestically, right? Internationally, we knew, hey, international audiences love these dinosaur movies for some reason. But domestically, again, it's been a lot of drops in recent years as far as just general interest being concerned. The number 4 movie was actually F1 the movie, so 6.2 million, 37% hold there. So this film holding very, very well, doing much better, again, compared to its opening weekend. This is a huge win for Apple TV, right? Obviously, Apple sold the distribution rights to this movie to Warner Brothers, so I imagine the deals between them means both of them are probably walking away pretty happy, even though on paper, based on the budget of this movie, it's not a profitable movie in that regards. The fact that you did have Apple sell those distribution rights, get those licensing fees, or rather Warner Brothers getting some of those licensing fees and stuff, we imagine actually that both of these studios are probably still going to walk away pretty happy with this, right? It just goes to show you that you can have a film that costs a lot of money, but if you know how to work those deals and if you have some success at the box office, as this film is having, then yeah, you'd be able to walk away with quite a bit of money. And so I think that's really what's going on here. It'd be interesting to see if they start to do this going forward, because in the past, when they have basically done everything in-house, they have not found this kind of success and have really walked away with a lot of huge box office losses. I imagine that this being as successful as it is might be a sign of what they'll do going forward. It'll also be interesting to see if Amazon tries something similar in the future, though of course their MGM brand has just really not been making that much money either. Again, when you're a $1 trillion corporation, I don't think it matters all that much, but hey, you can only make so many films that lose hundreds of millions of dollars before eventually you have to start thinking to yourself, yeah, you kind of need to make profit at some point in time. The new Smurfs film that came out last weekend and no one really knew about it actually held well. It had a very bad opening weekend, so that's why even though a 51% drop is not the worst thing in the world, for a kids movie, it's actually not that great. And more importantly, because of how bad its opening weekend was, this film actually right now is set to lose money. It only costs $58 million to make, which for an animated movie is actually on the very cheap side. But no one's going to see this film. No one really heard about it. Maybe it'll have some better luck on streaming or VOD. But as of right now, this film is set to lose a little bit of money. And I'll lastly mention here a couple other movies because they are films that are in their second weekend. I Know What You Did Last Summer from Sony. Hey, 60% drop is a pretty staggering drop off. And yet, because this film only costs $18 million, it's currently only about $5 million in the red. And I have this projected to actually make profit. So out of all the films that are in the second weekend, this is the only one that is likely to make profit. Now, because of its drop off being as stark and staggering as it is, it probably won't hit that profitability point for another 2 weeks, because typically a movie like this, when it's this close, $5 million is not too much to make up. You would think, okay, by next weekend, but because of how little money it's making, that's why I wouldn't be surprised if it might take this film maybe an extra week after to make its money back. So either by the end of next weekend or more likely by the end of the second weekend after. The fact that this film, though, is going to be profitable and this film has not gotten any positive praise whatsoever, again, kudos to Sony, because Lord knows they're going to sell this thing to Netflix if they haven't already, and they're going to make money off of that deal. So, hey, kudos to them. They've made profit off of this movie, probably because of that deal already. And then lastly, Eddington for A24, not the same story for this movie as it was for I Know What You Did Last Summer, because for A24, 62% drop for this Ari Aster movie. Oh boy, this is really, really bad. It's only made about, around $8 million or so total, $8.1 million in its entire release. And this film, because it cost $25 million, not really whole lot more than that of I Know What You Did Last Summer, because it's just making so little and making nothing internationally, $8.1 million means this film is set to be like a $25 to $30 million loser. So yeah, not a good thing for A24. And I know Ari Aster has his fans, but this ain't good. All right, going to the global box office, Fantastic Four First Steps, $218 million. Again, not a great box office start. Let's just be honest. Just like with Superman, gonna treat all films fairly here. When you look at both of these movies, both of these are not great starts for these kinds of movies. These are films that should be bringing in a lot more. Now, as we're Superman, because it had such a strong second weekend domestically, right, such a strong hold domestically, even though it's really still not doing much internationally, this was going to be the chance for Fantastic Four to come in and actually, make its presence known. But it ended up losing the battle with it, right, with Superman, with James Gunn's Superman domestically, and only made $5 million more internationally. So even though it did have a stronger international opening, by only about $5 million, that's just not a whole lot. So that week 2 drop-off will be interesting, right? If it's able to catch up internationally, right now, I believe Superman has just crossed $200 million internationally, right? So if it's able to catch up to that, there's definitely a good chance that it might be able to make a case for itself, to maybe still have that chance of edging it out. But because the domestic box office will likely have, again, on average, MCU films drop off quite a bit in their second weekend. So if it follows that same trend that almost all MCU films have followed, it would mean that this film will end its run a lot lower than that of Superman, and only because of the domestic. But I honestly think the bigger story here is international, because now you have 2 global releases that are both coming in very, very low. Right? Because after 3 weeks to be at $213 million, and you still have such a huge advantage there up against it, right? For some reason, the numbers.com is having some issues as far as being able to offer its reports. But the fact that you're looking at these kinds of differences, right, between these two in the way that it is, between its domestic and international, is a pretty big deal, right? I think that people are not going to necessarily understand that until the final numbers come in. But when you're ending this much higher domestically than internationally, and again, it's made a little bit of a comeback, I guess you could argue, again, as the site just crashes on me, but still not quite enough, I think, to be able to make them, confident in any of these things. Now, we have some comparisons here between Superman and Fantastic Four. And so as you have, obviously, this understanding, 125 was the opening weekend for Superman versus 118 for Fantastic Four. Again, not the biggest difference in the world, but because the international for Fantastic Four isn't that much better than Superman, if it has a typical MCU drop, Fantastic Four is probably in a bit of trouble, not only individually, but also in the battle up against Superman as well. Now, Superman's numbers, again, have held pretty well, but again, not as well as some people might actually think, right? Actually putting this up against some other movies for comparison, right? When you adjust for inflation, taking into account ticket sales, whatever it is that you want to do, right? Less people are going to see this Superman than any of the other films on this chart, right? Or for the most part. So Man of Steel, right, back when that film came out, was at $345 million when you adjust for inflation at this same point. As far as weekend comparisons, look at the advantage it has there. And though it is still ahead of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's not by all that much. And if you look at this third Saturday number, Guardians 3 actually made $14.4 million in its third Saturday to $9.8 million for Superman's third Saturday. So that's both James Gunn movies, both these global things. So I would not be surprised if Guardians ends up catching up with Superman, and that's going to be interesting to see. How much better does Superman do than Guardians? Guardians ended its domestic run at 371. Right now, Superman looks like it's probably going to be around 350-ish by the end of its run. Does it make a little bit more, a little bit less? Hard to say. But I can see Guardians still winning that battle, and it's going to easily win the battle internationally, because there's just no way for these international numbers to get that much better for Superman, as they are just still not quite showing up for the overall movie. And so again, this film is still set to probably get close to, it's going to be between $600 and $700 million globally, which again is fine. But when you have a budget of at least 225, and I've already made my comments about that very well known, that's not including your marketing costs. That is not the kind of number that you want to see, right? You have a break even well over $600 million. And so if you're looking to end between 600 and 700, that means you're maybe losing a little bit or making a little bit of money. That is not where you want to be at the start of your new franchise, especially when you have a director who is as well known as he is and as divisive as he is. For anyone still trying to make the Batman Begins comparison, that was Nolan in the early years when people, again, as far as normies audiences are concerned, didn't really know a whole lot about him. They got a really great introduction to him in Batman Begins. Dark Knight then took off because of that, and therefore now you have Nolan having the power that he does in Hollywood to tell studios to go screw themselves. Superman and James Gunn do not have that same story. And so though you can say the numbers are very similar here, and you think that, hey, maybe the numbers are going to be the same, the big factor that people are forgetting is notoriety and how much people know you. And when people understand your shtick and are tired of your shtick, as I think a lot of people are tired now of the James Gunn shtick because it's so consistent, there's just no denying. Just like the MCU is played out, and we're seeing this now happen for this movie too. This was also a hugely important movie for Disney, right? So just as Superman was important for the DCU, and it's not going nearly as well as it should be, Fantastic Four is also in a similar situation and might actually be in a much worse situation just because of all of those unknowns that are still out there as far as the second weekend numbers are concerned. All the while, Jurassic World Rebirth is at $718 million. So this film, $400 plus million internationally, $300 million domestic. This is the most surprising to me. I did not think that you would see this movie with this high of a domestic total. So this film is set to, again, make well over $800 million by the end of its run based on its current tracking. Again, $1 billion I just don't think is on the table. This film is still tracking behind where the last film was, and that film barely made it to $1 billion. But the fact that this movie is going to get anywhere close to 800 to 900 million, it's just insane to me. F1, $509 million. Again, a pretty big win for Apple, no doubt about that. Smurfs, $69 million globally. Again, the drop-off not as bad as it would seem, but no one's going to see this movie. I Know What You Did Last Summer, $45 million. Again, not doing much at all at the box office, but because it costs so little, it's going to make its money back. And then Eddington, a box office flop for A24. Going over the charts because we love Chatsy on OMB Reviews. We can make some projections for a few of these films. So I Know What You Did Last Summer, right now with a 2-week total of $45 million, we can project the film to make somewhere between $65 and $91 million by the end of its run. Smurfs, $98 million to $138 million, and Eddington to make around $11 to $16 million. Now, again, the budgets for those films, $18, $58, and $25 million respectively, again, as I mentioned earlier, mean that, hey, I Know What You Did Last Summer, projected to make between 12 and 27 million, probably more realistically somewhere between 10 and 15 or 10 and 20 million dollars in net profits. When you take things into account. So, hey, that is what it is. Smurfs, though, because of its $58 million budget, and it's just not really being seen by anyone, not in the worst position, right? $27 million in losses, so maybe $30 million to 10 maybe in losses. Maybe if it does a little bit better, it'll get closer to that 4 million as it's on the chart here. But as I said before, they might be able to make some money back on VOD sales, and so that's like the only thing that's really positive for this movie going forward. And Eddington doesn't have any of that. A24, again, might be able to sell the streaming rights, the VOD, or have something on VOD, sell the streaming rights to this movie, make some money there. But $30 to $27 million for a movie that costs about $25 million, that's not really where you want to be. Right? Because you spent $25 million and you're walking away losing $25 million. So that's about $50 million, right? In comparison to each other. That's because of those marketing costs and everything else that's attached to it. You don't get 100% of your box office back either. So yeah, Eddington's not in a very good place. The other, Pedro Pascal movie. So whereas he's got one that's doing a lot better, but still not all that great, his other one is right now a box office flop. And then looking at the current numbers for Fantastic Four, right now, if you believe the $225 million number, right now I have it listed as for this movie it's $200 million. So if you believe that, that's the other thing too, right? Just like with James Gunn Superman, I don't really buy the 225 number because the reports earlier on their own tax forms were that it actually was likely to cost a lot more than that. Even with your tax credits, again, 225 just seems unrealistic. Same thing also with MCU. We all know MCU movies, whenever a film from the MCU has filmed in the United Kingdom, they've always said, and they've always leaked out, oh yeah, this film only cost $200 million, $200 million, $200 million. That number is very consistent from them. And yet, in every case, when there was a UK production, it always cost more by at least $100 million. So even if you're filming in the United Kingdom or not, the fact that they will put numbers out there that are over $100 million off of what the reality is, I don't buy anything that the MCU or Disney say when it comes to their budgets being concerned. That being said, if you assume the $200 million budget is accurate, currently it's at $195 million in financial losses. Again, does it have the chance to make its money back? It's definitely potential, right? It has to make about 3 times its budget, so that's $600 million to make its money back. As of right now, if it follows a average box office run, it'll hit that number and maybe make a little bit more. But when a movie like this comes out, you don't want to say, I'm barely making profit, I'm barely breaking even, or making even just a small amount of profit. You want it to be a huge tentpole film that brings in huge profits to fund your future projects going forward. As of right now, based on the numbers that we have in front of us, that is not happening for this movie. And the fact that it's not going to be doing that, and on top of that, it's also, at this point, seemingly going to be losing to James Gunn's Superman, things aren't looking very good for this film going forward. Some other updates here for those that are interested in some of the other ones. Some of the charts are not updating because, as I mentioned before, the numbers is having some issues. Lilo and Stitch, again, hasn't really added much of anything. Disney was basically willing that film to cross $1 billion, and then they're basically like, yeah, it's on VOD now, and isn't that all convenient, right? That's basically what they try to do there. Ballerina, again, was pretty much already done at this box office anyway, and I've already updated these other films. And so, hey, let me know your thoughts about any of these things I mentioned in the comment section down below. Do you think Fantastic Four is going to have a strong weekend to hold? I doubt it, just historically. It's not a very likely thing. Even the positively received ones have still dropped quite a bit. But also, the more important question, do you think that Fantastic Four is going to end up beating Superman, or the Superman's going to end up winning? Fantastic Four basically only had one thing going for it, which is that it had the potential to get quite a bit more money international. That's not happening right now. So week 2 will tell us a lot more. If the film's able to go run away, at least up against Superman internationally, that might be the opportunity that it'll have to maybe catch up to and even beat Superman. But if the numbers are, as we expect, having that typical week 2 drop-off from the MCU's levels, and it's doing well internationally but not domestically, yeah, Fantastic Four could still end up doing much worse. So let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Make sure you also smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of the day, a blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.